Hi everyone, it's Jen with Spirited Saturdays, and today we're talking about depression as it presents an obstacle to eating disorder recovery. So, not so much depression and depression and recovery coexisting as much as having the two issues and one preventing the other one from progressing. So not like we're not really focusing so much on the depression being caused by the eating disorder as we are focusing on having both of the issues present and dealing with that when you're working really hard in your recovery, but the depression feels like a roadblock when you're progressing in your eating disorder recovery. Um, there are a few things I'd like to touch on in this video. One is that I think when you are progressing in your eating disorder recovery, that other things will come up because what's happening is that you're allowing yourself to connect with your feelings and face vulnerabilities. So often, if you struggle with depression as a pre-existing issue, um, it may get worse. You may be more vulnerable to experiencing depression because you may be more vulnerable to experiencing feelings in the extreme anyway. So anybody would feel vulnerable to experiencing intense feelings, and if you already struggle with depression, that might surface. It might trigger an episode or an onset of depression or depressive symptoms, um, because the eating disorder can be such a numbing agent. So once you have faced that and are brave enough to have faced that, other things might come up. One of which might be depression. Hey, you may have been using the eating disorder to even cope with the depression. So, yeah, that may be something that you feared would happen, and you may see it actually happening. And the thing to do then would be to really notice it and to say, okay, this is coming up. It's coming up because I'm doing so well in my eating disorder. It's coming up because my body and my brain are in a place where they're strong enough to to acknowledge and feel and work with these issues now. And maybe when I was in a very fragile state, I wouldn't have been able to tolerate it, but now, as a result of my strengthening, I can. And so what do I do with that now? Um, I think for anybody, if you struggle with an eating disorder, stuff is going to come up. But if you kind of already have these other mood disorders or mood issues that you have dealt with that maybe you use the eating disorder to cope with, then sure, you might see a resurfacing of that in your recovery. I think that personally you should take it as a sign of strength that, you know, this is coming up and you can recognize what it is, and now you have the opportunity to deal with it in a constructive way, to even use it, use it for, maybe it's creative purposes. Maybe you can now channel it into something, that isn't destructive, and maybe you can see it as another chance now to use it productively, and to not go to this default place of the eating disorder to cope with it. Often, these other issues get overlooked because people in treatment, the treatment providers deal with the eating disorder first. It's like if you're going into treatment for substance abuse and you also have another disorder, or you have a disorder in addition to having a substance abuse problem, they will more often than not, probably deal with the substance abuse problem first because they want to make sure that's straight, and then they go on to deal with whatever's there in the absence of that, of the influence of the additional chemicals you're putting in your body. So like, so often places will deal with the eating disorder first just to make the distinction of what is coming from the eating disorder and what is coming from the other issue. And often when you're so into the eating disorder, you might not even be able to tell. So it's important to weed that out. But it's very valid and very legitimate that you can have these things going on. And at some point, you may have them both, but then they might influence one another. So it's very important in recovery. So even if you know, like, yes, I legitimately have two issues, it's important to recognize how at any stage of the eating disorder, whether it's in the illness, whether it's in the refeeding, in the recovery process, at any point, maintenance, any point, your body, your mind has still been affected by the eating disorder. So it still may bring about depressive symptoms that may not have been there in its absence. So, even strong into recovery, it still one may influence the other. So the depression might influence the food might influence the depression. And if the food is influencing the depression, really try, again, to see that as like a necessary roadblock, a roadblock that is present for you to now choose to deal with differently than you have in the past. Something for me that I don't normally talk about, certainly not intentionally, but it just doesn't come up much anymore these days, is that I struggled a lot with depression. I struggled with depression, which then influenced my whole, I struggled a lot with self-injury. So I had a long period of struggle with depression and self-injury. Self-injury ended when I went into a treatment program for depression, and various people were, like, people who dealt with self-injury were there, people who dealt with eating disorders were there, but this was pre-eating disorder. So I was in college, and I took a semester off, and I went into this day program to deal specifically with the depression and the self-injury symptom of it. And so I knew the depression was like a very big underlying piece of any symptom I used to deal with it. I mean, basically what happened was when I stopped self-injuring, which I did, I managed to get a hold on that, and I managed to get better from that. But after about, I don't know, well, almost pretty much immediately after getting past that, I started to use food. So I know, like, in a number of ways, like, I started to slowly develop an eating disorder. So, this was surely not, these things are not, isolated. They're all linked. And when I got help for my eating disorder, I was really getting help for my depression and all of the manifestations of that, the feeling of hopelessness, the feeling of all of these beliefs I had about myself, which were the precursors of the self-injury and then the precursors of the eating disorder, because just because I stopped self-injuring didn't mean that all those things were sewn up and closed up and better. I still had a lot of work to do. So I recognized for myself that depression was a precursor for a lot of my struggles, and then it just kind of all mingled together, and when I recovered, I really did feel like I was addressing everything. I was addressing myself on a more holistic level, and I do feel like everything that happened exactly as it happened in a way that really, really ultimately served me. Like, even though I didn't even though I still developed an eating disorder after getting help for the self-injury, because I was in that program that I was in, I met my therapist, who is now my current therapist. So it's just I don't know, it just kind of I'm a huge advocate of it all happens as it should, and for a reason. And I certainly don't want to dismiss any of those years, and I don't want to dismiss any of the work that I did. I think it's very important, and it all kind of led to this point. But yeah, I mean, there's a difference between saying that everything happens for a reason, and also we can choose and we can create and we can direct that path. So I'm not just saying, like, I think, I wish I did catch it earlier, but I'm just saying I'm trying, I find purpose in the journey, and I find, beauty in what led me to this place. So that was a kind of a side note, but I just wanted to give you some personal feedback. I've had to do a lot of weeding through, like, what is the depression, what is the food, it's all very, interlinked. What am I, I mean, when I had bulimia, I was, it wasn't numbing, but in a different way than when I was anorexic. When I just, when I would binge eat, like, I kind of had, everything at a certain point. So like, there was a period when I binged, and, it was that binge eating disorder. So when I had that, it was more like, yeah, I mean, it was just all different kinds of numbing, and I wasn't connected to my feelings. So it's like when I started recovering from all of that, I started connecting to my feelings, and some of those feelings are very hard, and I did have to deal with the depression again, and that was hard, but I finally was able to start channeling it into some very empowering, profound um, expressions, and I was able to start, using it as a strengthening tool, like using the depression and channeling that and strengthening myself so that I could share and feel like I was part of a community, and strengthen and hopefully inspire others to feel strengthened. And it can become, like, along with the appropriate treatment, obviously, it can become a source of empowerment. It doesn't have to be a path to sickness. It doesn't have to be a roadblock in the sense of feeling paralyzed or stuck. It can actually be an opportunity for empowerment and for sharing, and finally getting to that place where it's like you can be as honest as you want. You don't need the eating disorder. You can say, this is what's happening. I'm having these feelings. I'm not judging them. I'm not ashamed of them. Let's be real. Let's address them. Let's connect over them, and let's empower each other. That's what's real, and that will ultimately get you to a much better place in your recovery. So, all right, thank you so much for watching, listening, and have a great week. Okay, bye-bye.